Thanks very much, Jay. My coworker drew that on my whiteboard for me. She's cuter than I am. So you've heard something now about Jay's extraordinary vision for the Asian Art Museum and seen some of its results, particularly on site, which have been pretty amazing. But when I started just over a year ago, we weren't really where we needed to be on the web or in digital in general. This is where we were online before the brand launch. This is one of the exhibitions that happened before the relaunch of the brand. We relaunched the brand and things certainly got better. The website got a little reskin. And we attempted something bolder for the contemporary exhibition that Jay just mentioned, Phantoms of Asia. But we still didn't have the infrastructure that we needed to really make this sing and really realise the vision. This is where we were on mobile, basically. Obviously, in 2012, that isn't really good enough. Our web traffic had dropped between 2010 and 2011 by 10%. And we really kind of felt like we were headed in the wrong direction. 61% of our audience comes into the museum with a smartphone. And from the last slide you saw, we don't really have anything to offer them. We'd done one experiment with creating a kind of an app from our audio tour, and that was really all we'd done specifically for that mobile audience. So our users were clearly signalling their needs, and we really felt we weren't meeting them. So that was the impetus for change. But how do we do it? We don't have a ton of resources. Change obviously is widespread, it's organisational, it requires profound decisions about strategy. We did all that kind of work, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I want to talk about how we took the step beyond strategy into implementation and how we're going to continue taking that step in order to realise Jay's vision in digital. In particular, as I mentioned, not a lot of resources. We needed to figure out how we can use what we have effectively. And then in what skills we really need to invest, so we're making the right investments. As Jay talked about, there was a clear need for us to rebrand, and that obviously had to include our website. So we did what museums do. We created a committee. We created this was before I joined, but our marketing and brand director had a great idea of creating a cross-functional digital branding team. And this team was charged with realising the brand in digital, which really meant on the website. They were in charge of putting together a reskin of the website. It involved all levels of the organisation, from the executive right through to the trenches. It was cross-departmental. Most departments of the museum were represented on this team. None of these people were hired to do digital work. They all had full-time jobs of their own. They were passionate, committed people who wanted to see digital succeed for the museum. They went above and beyond their normal roles. They drew on their talents and their interests from outside. But as a whole, I think we had the will, but not always the skill. There were three big problems with the team when I arrived. One, it was really large and unwieldy. I think there were 18 people in the team when I joined, and they had a lot of meetings where they talked about a lot of stuff. But it was really hard to make decisions. Decision-making was slow if it happened at all, and that was a real challenge. The group also had no clear authority. It wasn't obvious that the group was enabled to make decisions, and it wasn't clear who within the group could, for example, sign off on those decisions, or if it needed to. Most of the senior management team was on that group, and yet there was no clear kind of decision-making authority. And beyond the brand launch, there was no clear raison d'etre for the group. It didn't really have any goals. So we made a new digital branding team. When I started, I began analysing the strengths and weaknesses of the individuals involved and of the team as a whole. And then I started to break the team up. I wanted to break the team up partly to make it smaller, because that was an issue, but also to make sure that people's People were working on things in line with their own skills and in line with their ability to commit time, which was really important. Having the whole of our senior management team turn up to meetings is a big deal. Finding a time when they could meet was really difficult. And then them being able to read anything, prepare anything, go and do any actions was almost impossible. They just didn't have the time to do it. So the first thing that I did was to create a governance layer for the team. I basically took all the senior managers and made them into a steering committee. It meant that they could make high-level strategic decisions without having to be the ones who were involved in discussions about the minutiae of font color and things like that. I then broke it up into 3 other teams by function: innovate, implement, and improve. The innovation team makes recommendations to the steering committee about the overall program of digital work. So they look at proposed initiatives. We have no shortage of ideas at the museum, as you can imagine. A lot of people bringing ideas to the table about what we could be doing in digital. I like to say that ideas are cheap. It's implementation that's difficult and expensive. So we needed a way, we had no process for reviewing those ideas, so it just ended up being what floated to the top would perhaps get done. So we now have a team in place who actually has a way to review those ideas, review them not only against each other and prioritise them against each other, but also prioritise them against our strategic goals, which is clearly very important. And that's partly what the governance layer is also for. So the innovation team makes recommendations to the steering committee. The steering committee ultimately says yes or no. The implementation team is essentially a project management layer. This was probably the area where we had the biggest skills gap in the museum. And there were clearly some people who had good, strong project management skills, but we weren't necessarily using those people to do project management. And then a bunch of people were trying to do project management who weren't necessarily suited to it or didn't have time. So I'm trying with that group, and this is a work in progress, to put together a community of practice around project management in the museum. We've started out specifically with digital. I'm hoping that that knowledge sharing and skill sharing can expand beyond just people who are doing digital projects, and that community of practice can help us to improve our project management across the board. Because I'm from a project management background, I'm a little biased, but I think it's crucial in order to deliver that people understand that project management is a skill set and it's a specific skill set, and you can't just kind of get by without it. And then the improve team. This is it's kind of obvious. These are the people who make day-to-day improvements to our website or other digital products. Mostly it's the website right now. This went beyond our original team, which was interesting to me, just seeing how many people were involved in making changes to the website, in creating content for the website, in updating the calendar. People were able to access it via Adobe Contribute and would, sort of come out of the woodwork, oh, I've made this new page, can you publish it? And I felt it was really important to figure out who those people were and make sure that they knew about each other. So if they were having problems, they had people to rely on, they had people to talk to. So that's the improved team. So once we made these changes, we had a foundation, we had some kind of a structure to begin thinking about how we could go about doing our digital work. But for making change, I really felt like we needed to tap into the movers and shakers in the museum, the people who were actually going to help us to get things done. Coming in new, you can be a change agent, and in a lot of ways I think that's why they hired someone for this role. But I've always felt that it's really crucial to identify the people within the organisation who are going to help you do that, people who already have trust, who have cachet, who have relationships. I like to think about this as identifying your champions. So who was going to champion digital for us? So I wanted to tell you just a little story, really, about how I found a champion. So this is Forrest. Forrest McGill is our chief curator. When I had my second interview, I sat in a room and there were about 15 people in there firing questions at me. all kinds of random, it seemed at the time, questions. It became clear later on. But Forrest really stood out. Forrest sat opposite me and very earnestly started asking me a question about whether it would be possible to make something. It involved Google Maps and the idea of being able to locate a particular artwork from, its original location. He was essentially pitching a Maps app in my interview. And by the end of the interview, what I walked away with really was, I really have to work with that guy. That guy's awesome. So Forrest really inspired me and showed me that there was at least one person at the museum thinking about how we should make use of technology for our storytelling purposes. Forrest is a great storyteller. He gets technology not because he has technology experience, but because of that profound understanding of storytelling. Because he can see a piece of technology and see it working in some completely different context and see how that could help him to tell stories about our collection. And that to me was enough to think that Forrest was really somebody who was completely on board with what we wanted to do. So here's one example of something that we did. We have a marketing goal to attract people to the museum to see our collection, not just to see special exhibitions. We've been exploring innovative ways for people to experience the collection for a while. Now, our director of marketing, Amy, and I had been talking about 3D printing. This was a hot new thing. Lots of people were talking about it. It was kind of the new black. And in fact, I believe that Seb Chan at a Museums on the Web or another conference said that augmented reality was over and it was all about 3D printing now. So people came back buzzing with that kind of message. So we thought, well, we better be looking at 3D printing, very important. Now, it turned out that our collection is actually very well suited to 3D scanning. We have these kinds of detailed works in stone. We have richly textured objects, like these ones. And a lot of our objects are really old. We don't have a ton of intellectual property concerns, which is key. Also, they're really, really cool. So we wanted to try this, but we knew it was a risk. We didn't know exactly what the benefits were going to be, but we had this opportunity to work with Autodesk and to work with some folks who were using MakerBot printers, and we thought we'd like to pursue it. So our next step was to talk to Forrest. Forrest immediately saw the possibilities for the user experience way beyond anything that we had already thought of. He came up with new interpretive opportunities as he was speaking to the folks from Autodesk and the MakerBot creators. He was imagining how this could enable us to look inside objects, to pull apart objects that are normally, say, sets of lacquer boxes that are nested, that you can see in one form only, but suddenly he could see the possibilities for seeing those objects in another way, for our visitors to see those objects in another way. So this gave us certainty that it was worth spending time on this project. And importantly, it gave us the ability to execute. So we had a scan-a-thon. We partnered with Autodesk. We had a bunch of artists come to the museum. They used, Autodesk had just released the 123D Catch iPhone app, so we had people using their iPhones, we had people using their iPads, people with SLRs come into the museum and scan collection objects. As they were on display in their cases, we didn't have to touch anything, we didn't take anything off view, and Forrest was able to help us to negotiate all of those things to make sure that we kept the art safe, that we kept registrars and conservationists happy, conservators, not conservationists. I get in trouble for that all the time. And we ended up with these really cool objects. Some of them we printed on site, some of them we simply modelled. And there's our Nandi being printed in a MakerBot printer. So that one took about about half an hour and is about that big. The larger objects took up to 24 hours to print. But we see real possibilities for using this technology for our visitors. It was a really fun day, 2 days actually. It wasn't just a fun thing though. We haven't really taken it much further yet, but we can see that we could use these scans on tablets and allow people in the galleries to rotate the object that they see in front of them. Maybe look underneath it, maybe look at it from the top. Ways that you can't actually look at the artwork when it's in a case necessarily, they could do if they could rotate the object on a tablet in front of them. Perhaps we could use it to create low-cost augmented reality. We have the 3D models. There are all kinds of things we could do with those. We could use it as the basis for animation. We've also had feedback from staff really unexpectedly that when they held the printed objects, some of these, even though they're just captured with an iPhone and printed on a consumer printer, they have an extraordinary amount of detail. And people holding these plastic objects have said that they look at the real object differently when they can trace the details with their fingers and really come to understand how much detail is in those original objects based on what there is in just this fairly lo-fi scan. So that opens up possibilities that we can think about for the visitor experience. What happens if you can hold this, even though it's not the original material, even though it's not the real thing or the real size? We also would love to have, we've had a couple of examples of people reusing our objects. I really love this guy. But people taking our objects and finding different uses for them. That first object I showed you, a Christian from Autodesk made it into an iPhone case for Forest. And we want to encourage more of this kind of exploration of how artists could create new works based on our collection. We've uploaded, to this end, we've uploaded the scans, or some of the scans. We did about 30, I think, on the day. We've uploaded them to Thingiverse. They're publicly available. It's a Creative Commons license. And our next step is going to be to start encouraging people to start using those. Also, we made the homepage of Wired, which was pretty cool. But the most remarkable thing to me in all of this is not the event, and it's not even the stuff that we got out of the event. It's the fact that the reason we were able to do this was because of that guy. The reason we were able to do this was because our chief curator, Waddest curator of South and Southeast Asian art, I think I got that right, he's an expert in really old stone artworks, and he was the guy who made it happen. So it was amazing to me that somebody who was already in the institution, who people wouldn't normally think of as the go-to guy for digital, was actually the person who could bring all of this together. So far I've talked about a couple of things that require thought, effort, and time. But the astute among you have probably noticed that I haven't mentioned money, which is kind of important. So where to invest financially is a massive question for us, as I'm sure it is for many, if not all of you. So I wanted to share a few insights about where we're putting the big bucks as well. There was a huge amount of frustration for us when I joined about the fact that other museums seem to be doing amazing things digitally, really amazing cutting-edge work. And I'm sure lots of those people are going to be speaking over the next few days. And we felt that we could never catch up. The problem with playing catch-up is that everyone else is still moving. So we felt like we were in this position where every step we took, we'd still be behind. So we needed to play leapfrog. But you can't leapfrog off quicksand, which is kind of where we were. We really didn't have any infrastructure to speak of. A year ago, we couldn't even keep our servers stable. We, in particular, didn't have a web content management system. I mean, at all. We had one we didn't like. We didn't have one. So we knew we had to invest in infrastructure. We knew we needed a web CMS. Unfortunately, infrastructure projects aren't necessarily all that sexy, and they're pretty expensive. But we knew it was fundamental to our ability to realise Jay's vision. You heard Jay talk about interconnectivity. It's very hard to do that when you can't break things into fields and tell them about other fields that exist. It's really hard to just do that with hyperlinks. I know, because I've been trying for a year. So that was a really key, critical decision for us that gave us focus for fundraising and for budget allocation. We had another important realisation. That's our CMS. We have one now, just the very beginnings of it. We were giving short shrift to the way we presented ourselves online. You saw some things before. We'd never had the resources to really focus on delivering the brand promise online. So we'd never had a web designer on staff. We hadn't had a dedicated web designer to design our website. We'd done an extraordinary amount with the team that was available, and kudos to them for what they achieved. It was a small team. They were entirely self-taught, and they produced the website as it stands, which is incredible. But we knew that this wasn't really the brand vision, and it wasn't really delivering on what Jay saw as our future. And when we think about it, we wouldn't cut corners on the way that we present our art. And we wouldn't cut corners on our interpretation of our artworks or on the way we display our exhibitions. These are things that we think about and focus on. For a lot of people, your website is the first experience they have of your institution. You guys all know this. It needs to look great. It needs to be intuitive, and it needs to work. These were all things that were not the case with our website. And for all of that, your website needs design. It's not just about visual design. It's about the design of the whole user experience. So we knew that design was another non-negotiable for us. We knew it was somewhere that we had to invest. So we had digital talent, but we didn't have the people who could do something like this. So that's why we're making the investments where we are. We're investing in a content management system and an entire site redesign. What you're seeing is the absolute tip of the iceberg. We've launched literally a couple of pages for our Terracotta Warriors exhibition for next year. There's so much infrastructure underneath this, and there's a lot more of this to come. We know that that's not enough. The website's core to our digital experience right now, but it's hardly the cutting edge. It's still just a website. It's more of a minimum requirement. And it doesn't offer anything special to that 61% with the smartphones. So we still have a lot of work to do. But 6 months ago, if you told me that artists would be doing 3D scans of our collection, and 6 months ago, if you told me we'd be dabbling in augmented reality, it's a little sneak peek of something that isn't the new black, apparently. If 6 months ago you told me that we'd be working with a world-class team, this is our team at Carbon 5, building a new website, I probably would have laughed at you. We got here by making sure that the right people were doing the right work, by identifying, finding those champions, and by ruthlessly prioritising our major products and our spending. We know there's still a ways to go. We're currently experimenting with low or no cost technology that will help us to learn how well we can execute on these type of projects and which types of technology, experience and platforms will best serve our storytelling needs. And we're continuing to revise and refine our strategy, particularly in mobile, so that we can keep investing wisely in those larger projects. Because we know that digital isn't just a tool or a gimmick. It's not going anywhere. And it's no longer separate from the physical experience. It's an integral part of how people go about experiencing the world just in their daily lives. So why shouldn't it be an integral part of how they go about experiencing the physical space of a museum? Thanks very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We've got about 10 minutes for questions or comments from anyone who wants clarifications or to bring up issues.
So the question was, how do we collect feedback? There are a few different ways. I'll be completely honest with you. We are not strong enough in the way we do analytics right now, but we use web analytics, and that's one way. We also user test our new products as rigorously as we can with limited resources. We do exit surveys, and we've started to include, we do quarterly exit surveys via our marketing team, and about 6 months ago, maybe 9 months ago, we started including more focused questions around digital and digital experiences in those exit surveys. So some of the statistics we have about smartphone usage and things like that come from our exit surveys. We also have done some research collaborating with university students. So some specific surveys focused on people's digital usage across the board, and specifically their usage of our site. So we've got a few different channels for getting feedback, but it's an area that I think we could really improve on.
Anyone else?
There's a question over here.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned scanning the old work, there were no intellectual property issues. Yet on the other hand, you talk about contemporary art. So I'd be very interested to know how you will wrestle with the intellectual property issues of contemporary art.
I don't know if do you want to speak to that, Jay? I can speak to the scanning part.
Yeah, probably we don't have a perfect solution. But right now, for example, I mentioned the name artist Xu, and he has created his first ever animation in his career, and it's shown right now in our museum. So our arrangement with him is that he ultimately owns the copyright, but we have a several copies that we could use for educational purpose without limitation. But so I think intellectual property right with living art is extremely important. But if anyone here can have other alternatives and other solutions, we'd love to hear. You can talk about.
For sure. So specifically pertaining to the scanning, we're only using our collection objects that we know don't have intellectual property issues. So that's one of the ways we're limiting it. And we have quite a lot of those. So we're not planning on scanning any contemporary art. Yeah.
I was wondering if you're seeing any new ways of categorizing and thinking about and understanding both the museum experience and its offerings on the basis of your audience research, and particularly if there's an inflection through this, this Asian lens that you talked about. Because I'm just noticing, like so many, museum websites, we tend to organize them in terms of how we think of our work and our museums, our programs, our exhibitions, our collections. And I'm just not sure that that's really how non-museum people or people who are not kind of museum literate think about those experiences. And I'm curious to learn what you've learned from listening to your audiences, and if there is a specific inflection through this kind of Asian lens.
We do quite extensive audience research, and on that basis, we come up with 4 psychographic categorization of our audiences, and many museums do that too. And our 4 categories are art lovers, the people who really love art very much, want to contemplate on the artistic quality by itself. And the second category we call art thrill seekers, and those are the people who like art, but they would like to have a contextual information. They want to learn why the art was made and how it was used and so on and so forth. The contextual information is very, very important to that category. And the third we call the spiritualists, who really think of Asian art as a place that to connect with the ancient civilizations on a spiritual way and a contemplative space, and a place that we can meditate. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. After September 11th, the terrorist attack, there's one study saying that more people actually goes to the museums and go to the churches. And so there's even such a term called museums as secular cathedral, whether you agree with that term or not, but you get the idea. So that is a part of our audience as well. And then, the fourth category we call the family fun time and / family learning time. These are the families who want to bring the kids, look at the museum as a potential source of education, as well as the entertainment for the kids. More on the learning, less on the entertainment side. So these are the 4 psychographic categories cut through our audience, regardless their the age and the ethnicity and the backgrounds. And we feel the largest category that we have not captured and have the largest growth potential is the art thrill seekers. And that drives partly our vision, that connecting art to life, make the art relevant to the life that people living today, even the art that we're talking about may be made 100-some years old, how their experience could still be relevant to the issues and concerns that we have today. So this is the basis on which that we do. And so on the same understanding, that is why we are pushing for the contemporary art as well, for the same idea of how we can do a better job in connecting art to life. Because our museum, for those of you know, first and foremost, we're known for its classical, traditional Asian art. We are not really known for contemporary art at all. So it's for us as a new departure. So what we want to do is that at the same time, we create this new dimension, engage our thrill seekers in their category, and at the same time, we sustain the scholarly quality which we are always known for our art lovers and our spiritualists, so that we have to find a good balance. And the kind of contemporary art, for example, we treat contemporary art in collecting and exhibition by 2 slightly different emphases. When we exhibiting, we all open, all kinds, and as long as it has connection with Asia. In the collecting, however, we are more focused on so-called tradition-inspired contemporary art. In other words, those particular arts or the art forms that have a very tangible a connection with the tradition of Asia. And that's which our collection, the core of our collection, represents. Of course, it's not like a line drawn in the sand. There's no clear-cut definition, the boundary, but the emphasis is certainly there. I hope that helps answer your question. Yeah, thank you.
If I can just continue the visionary implementer dichotomy, the way that we're using that information in how we put together our website on a sort of a structural level. You're right, Nancy, it's difficult, but we are focusing on that art thrill seeker segment and thinking about, well, what is it that they want to know and how do they want to know it? So we're trying to focus much more on structuring our content around themes and stories. It's still a bit of a difficult journey thinking about, well, what does that actually mean in a CMS? What's a theme? What's a story? These are kind of nebulous ideas to pin down in the content management system. But that's how we're working on it and thinking about it, so that we can, rather than saying here is art from China, here is art from Japan, which would be a really easy way for us to structure the content. We're thinking, well, perhaps we have an idea of this is art related to immortality, and what does that mean structurally? So we are trying to draw on it.
Maybe one more question. Yes. No.
I'd just like to comment how fantastic it is to see one of the long-standing curators being an innovator and leading a technical area. That's a revelation. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Comment, really.
I or my colleague have an idea, but the real shakers movers is she and her team.
Okay, thank you very much.